The entire office burst into laughter, mocking the mute technician, and even the director was taken aback as soon as the negotiation began. Clara Bennett, 20 years old, unmarried, and from an orphanage, sat across from Victoria Hayes, the head of human resources. Victoria held Clara's resume in her hands, glancing occasionally at the young woman seated opposite her. "What happened to you that led you to apply for this position at such a young age?" Victoria asked, eyes still fixed on the paper. Clara only shrugged modestly, avoiding Victoria's gaze. Clara hadn't been mute from birth, but for years she had been unable to speak due to the aftermath of a terrible accident that nearly took her life. "Oh, it says here that you can't speak," Victoria sighed. "The accident also took your parents. I'm so sorry. That's truly a tragedy." At those words, Clara shivered slightly as memories from the past came rushing back. Her lover holding her tightly amidst the screams, her mother calming and holding her. But then her father's voice from the driver's seat, and suddenly, everything plunged into chaos as the car was struck violently. Little Clara's body collided painfully, shards of glass and the screech of metal against the road. Her mother lay motionless, head slumped forward, and her father, unbuckled, was hurled through the windshield. Clara opened her mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The shock and trauma had stolen her voice forever. Back in the present, Clara pulled a card from her pocket with the word, "Yes," written on it. She raised it in response to Victoria. Then, Clara produced another card that read, "I can't speak, but I understand everything you say." Victoria shook her head with a hint of pity. "You lived in an orphanage?" Clara nodded, her shoulders sagging. After the accident, she had been taken to a hospital and later transferred to an orphanage. Efforts to help her included appointing a psychologist, but every therapy session failed. Clara's trauma-induced stress disorder was not easily overcome. "Your high school diploma is commendable," Victoria remarked, "but it's unfortunate you don't have many other opportunities." Clara merely shrugged. After leaving the orphanage, she couldn't find a place that would accept her despite her excellent academic record. Who would want to hire a mute orphan girl? Clara wanted to say that, but could only raise the cards from her pocket. "Honestly, it would be easier for us to hire a normal person," Victoria said bluntly. Clara sighed, realizing this could be yet another failed interview. She lowered her head, preparing to stand up. "Wait." Victoria paused, a hint of empathy flickering in her eyes. "We'll give you a chance, a 3-month trial period. If you do well, we'll consider helping you integrate further into society." Clara couldn't believe her ears. This was the first place that didn't outright reject her. Victoria emphasized that the job wasn't glamorous, the pay wasn't high, but it was an opportunity for Clara. She nodded, smiled, and lifted the card reading "Thank you." Though the tasks were simple, it was a first step toward new hope. But life wasn't as easy as she hoped. From her first day, colleagues in the office mocked her. They treated her presence like a joke, never missing a chance to ridicule her, leaving Clara to endure cruelty while simply wanting to work in peace. The managers continued to laugh, seemingly entertained by Clara's tears. She had nowhere to escape from the harsh words, like a vicious mob surrounding her with jeering remarks. The mocking laughter pierced deep into her soul. "I can't even fight back, can't defend myself or seek help," Clara thought, always left alone with pain and fear in silence. "You think anyone will feel sorry for you?" A harsh voice sneered from above, dripping with disdain. "You need someone to protect you? You'll have to work much harder than that." Came another round of laughter, causing Clara's heart to twist with anguish. Silent tears streamed down her face, and she felt nothing but helplessness and despair. She longed to break free from the chains of ridicule, to have someone who would share this burden. "Leave her alone," a voice suddenly called out from the crowd. It was Ethan. Clara flinched. In the midst of the taunting and scorn, Ethan stepped forward, facing her tormentors head-on. "She hasn't hurt anyone. Why are you doing this?" Ethan said, his voice trembling but determined. A few of the taunters backed off, but others redirected their mockery toward him. Oscar, the ringleader, smirked and ordered his followers to gather around. "You really think you're a hero?" Oscar mocked. Ethan stood firm, refusing to back down, even as the bullies closed in. "You'll be silenced like her soon enough?" Oscar sneered, but Ethan stood his ground. "You can laugh at me, but leave her alone," he said, eyes blazing with resolve. Clara looked at Ethan with deep gratitude but also fear for him. She knew he had now become a target for their malice. When the elevator doors opened, the bullies dispersed, leaving Ethan and Clara. "They're just fools," Ethan whispered, helping Clara pick up her cards. Though hurt, he never gave up his intent to protect her. Over the following weeks, that encounter became the start of a bond between them. Clara and Ethan gradually opened up to each other, sharing their sorrows and struggles. Their friendship blossomed into love, giving Clara a sense of belonging she had never known. Ethan, with his courage and compassion, became a light in her dark world. In a quiet corner, Clara furrowed her brow, bit her lip, and then shyly shrugged. She pulled out another note from her notebook, reading, "I'm fine. Don't worry. My mother is very sick, but she will be better with company. Let me wait for you after work and I'll show you where we live." Clara smiled timidly and nodded, her eyes bright with a fluttering heart. Without speaking, she hugged Ethan tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace seep into her. In the time they spent together, Clara and Ethan developed a unique way of communicating that only they understood. For the first time, Clara couldn't wait for the workday to end. She felt restless, excited, and eager to meet Ethan again, to be lost in his smile and loving gaze. For Clara, an orphaned girl, stepping into his home felt like opening herself up completely, gaining trust without conditions. "You're here," Ethan exclaimed happily when he saw Clara at the office door. She ran into his arms, kissing him softly on the cheek. They made their way to his modest apartment. As Ethan opened the old door, he said with slight embarrassment, "This is my home. Please don't judge it too harshly." Clara gently took his hand and stepped inside. The small apartment, though sparsely furnished, held a simple warmth born of frugality and family. Clara looked around with curious eyes. "I dream of fixing it all one day, but right now everything goes toward Mom's medicine," Ethan said, his eyes filled with love as he mentioned her. "Do we have a guest?" A gentle voice called from inside. "Yes, Mom. I wanted to introduce Clara to you," Ethan replied, and a frail but kind-looking woman appeared. Clara tried to smile politely, but her eyes filled with compassion. Ethan's mother, Isabella, looked very weak. She approached with thin hands showing veins beneath pale skin. "It's lovely to meet you, Clara," she said with a faint smile. The three of them spent time together in the kitchen. Though it was simple, the kitchen was filled with comforting scents. "Jacob, make some coffee for our guest," Isabella said, gazing distantly out the window as the evening sun bathed the scenery in red. "Is work going well at the company?" she asked. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, not wanting his mother to know the difficulties he faced. Clara nodded reassuringly and wrote in her notebook, "Everything is fine." Isabella's gentle smile returned, her eyes lighting up when she looked at the young couple. "You're a good person," Clara wrote, handing her the note. As the sun set, Clara felt acceptance and warmth from Ethan's mother. "You're always welcome here," Isabella said, placing her hand over Clara's. Tears welled in Clara's eyes, feeling for the first time that she was truly valued and understood. They continued talking, immersed in a warm, peaceful atmosphere. Though she didn't want to leave, Clara had to return to work the next morning. She wrote a farewell in her notebook, promising to return. Ethan walked her out, draping a light jacket over her shoulders. As dusk fell, they walked slowly, savoring every moment together. "You're the best thing that's ever happened to me," Clara wrote. Ethan smiled, leaned in, and kissed her softly. Their love deepened over time. The two no longer hid their relationship, and their love gave them strength to face challenges together. The scandal broke when the company's director, George Benson, known for his hardline approach, was ready to tear Ethan apart. "Believe me, it wasn't me. Why would I steal any data?" Ethan repeated, his voice trembling as he stood before Benson, sweat beading on his forehead. Then why was all this data transmitted through your computer? Huh? Benson yelled, his eyes blazing with anger. There must be some mistake. It's impossible. Ethan cried out in desperation. There's no mistake. I personally verified everything. William interjected, standing beside the director and eyeing Ethan without sympathy. Sensitive files were accessed from your computer, Benson continued, his voice commanding and cold. I'm just an intern. How could I have access to critical data? Ethan protested, trying in vain to make his case. If someone wanted, they'd find a way, Benson replied dismissively. No one in the room believed Ethan. With the evidence presented, he was deemed guilty. If you're caught, you'll be held responsible for these losses, Benson said, determined to make Ethan the scapegoat. Benson offered a cruel deal. You'll repay all the damages or I'll involve the police, and then things will get serious. Despair gripped Ethan. But how could I? He stammered, but Benson cut him off. We took the files from HR to ensure no one knew you were about to be fired. Easy, isn't it? Benson's words crushed Ethan. Struggling to stand, he was restrained by William's assistant, who forced him back into his seat. Ethan left the office with empty eyes, his face etched with despair. Clara immediately appeared at his side after waiting outside. I can't believe this is happening. Why would they accuse you like this? Clara wrote in her notebook, eyes wide with worry. I don't know, Clara. I've never accessed any other computer. I have no way to do this. But they've accused me. And now? Ethan trailed off, overwhelmed by helplessness. We have to do something. We can't let it end this way, Clara wrote, holding his hand tightly to encourage him. The days that followed grew worse. George Benson relentlessly pressured Ethan for compensation, threatening dire consequences otherwise. Meanwhile, Oscar, a longtime enemy of Ethan, took pleasure in his downfall. One morning, Clara overheard Oscar and his cronies discussing the plan to steal data and frame Ethan. Anger boiled within her, but she knew she needed to stay calm to save Ethan. Clara secretly followed Oscar's every move, silently but with fierce determination. When she uncovered the full scope of his dark plans, she resolved to expose the truth, regardless of the danger. I can't let this happen, Clara thought, and with every ounce of courage, she prepared to confront her destiny. Ethan's misery, Oscar's betrayal, and her love for Ethan pushed Clara to her breaking point. The walls she had built for years seemed to collapse. For the first time, Clara no longer wanted to run. She wanted to fight, to prove she was strong and to protect justice and Ethan. Clara took a deep breath, fighting back her swirling emotions, and then she spoke, her voice breaking the silence of the room. You don't understand. They're lying to you. George Benson turned around, his eyes wide with astonishment as he looked at the employee standing before him. You're not, Benson stammered, unable to believe his ears. Clara, the woman who had lived in silence for so many years, was now standing up and speaking. She could hardly believe it herself. Her throat burned, and her lips trembled with words that had gone unspoken for years. Oscar is the one who framed Ethan. He leaked the data to the competitors. If the deal goes through, this company will be his prey, Clara said, her voice tense but strong. George Benson studied Clara for a long moment, suspicion etched into his face. How do you know this? He asked, his voice low and cold. Clara swallowed hard, trying to steady herself. Oscar confessed. He thought a mute woman like me wouldn't be able to speak, and no one would believe me, she said, her eyes reflecting both pain and determination. Benson scrutinized her carefully, his gaze thoughtful. There was no reason for her to smash a vase in front of my associate unless it was urgent, he murmured, his tone softening. Clara exhaled deeply, feeling the weight that had pressed on her for so long begin to lift. Now, her and Ethan's fate rested on Benson's decision. The wave of investigation moved swiftly. The internal security team immediately detained Oscar and his accomplices. When they were brought into the office, George Benson stood by a large window, reflecting on what had just transpired. Oscar, how can I run this company with schemes like this brewing from within? Benson's icy glare fixed on the betrayer. Oscar glared back, but his hands were restrained, leaving him powerless. What's this? What are you people doing? Oscar shouted in desperation. We've uncovered everything, William, head of security, announced. We have evidence and witnesses proving you stole the data and framed Ethan. Oscar could no longer deny it, though his gaze remained full of menace. And what about me? Who's going to repay what I've lost? He spat out angrily. Benson shrugged, his voice calm but razor-sharp. Justice will decide your fate, just as you tried to seal the fate of others. Oscar sneered, but now he was completely defeated. His game was over, leaving only regret and bitterness in its wake. Clara stood by Ethan's side, holding his hand tightly. They both knew that their challenges were far from over, but the light of truth had allowed them to move forward. They looked at each other, feeling warmth and trust flow between them. Two people who had weathered the fiercest storms together. Clara took a deep breath, feeling freer than she ever had. For the first time in her life, she realized she was no longer alone. And with Ethan's determined gaze by her side, she knew they would keep fighting. Not just for themselves, but for justice, truth, and love. With the dark schemes exposed, the company gradually returned to stability. George Benson, having secured a profitable and secure business deal that would protect all employees for years to come, decided to hold an appreciation ceremony. The grand hall buzzed with chatter and laughter. Everyone's attention focused on the stage as Benson began his speech. I want to express my deep gratitude to the person who helped reveal the truth and protect this company from disaster, he said, his warm and sincere voice resonating through the room. And along with that, I want to apologize, Benson continued, his voice wavering slightly. I'm sorry for sometimes being too harsh and for not giving Clara the recognition she deserved. Benson stepped forward, extending his hand to invite the young woman in the front row to the stage. Clara stood, her heart pounding. Her steps were hesitant, but her eyes shone with determination. When she reached the stage, Benson looked directly into her eyes and said, "Thank you, Clara, for your incredible courage. Your actions saved this company and all of us from a grave mistake." The room erupted in applause. Clara smiled, tears streaming down her face. She had never imagined that a janitor like herself would stand there, receiving the warmest thanks. "Thank you for welcoming me and giving me new meaning in life," Clara said, her voice still trembling but resolute. The audience rose to their feet, applauding continuously. George Benson added, "In addition to our gratitude, we have a special reward for you." Clara bowed her head as she accepted the envelope, her eyes brimming with emotion. It was not just a monetary reward but a symbol of the recognition she had earned. She returned to her seat, overwhelmed with emotion. George Benson continued, "I also want to apologize to Ethan, who was caught up in this cruel scheme." Ethan squeezed Clara's hand, drawing strength from her. As he walked to the stage, pride filled his heart. "Today, we formally invite you to join the company as a manager," Benson declared. Applause erupted again, even louder this time. Ethan shook George Benson's hand, his eyes shining brightly. This was not only recognition but also a testament to everything he had endured and overcome. When Ethan returned to his seat next to Clara, he looked at her with deep love. "Finally, everything's okay," he whispered. "Yes," Clara replied softly, her voice filled with emotion. "I'm still not used to hearing my own voice." Ethan smiled, his eyes full of love. "I'm constantly amazed by you. So, what's your plan for the future?" he asked, his voice gentle but full of anticipation. Clara smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "I've applied for distance learning in management. I want to work alongside you." Ethan's smile widened, his eyes sparkling with joy. He leaned in and whispered, "I wanted to do this on stage, but I thought you'd be embarrassed." With that, he pulled out a small box from his pocket. Opening it, a sparkling diamond ring appeared. "Clara, will you marry me?" he asked softly but sincerely. Clara was stunned, overwhelmed by emotion. Her heart raced, filled with indescribable happiness. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. In that moment, Clara knew that every challenge had led her to this point, a place of love, acceptance, and a bright future ahead.